Let me start out by saying I have sincere respect for Jordan Peterson. I truly believe he has good intentions, and this is by no means a criticism of him as a person. That being said, I listened to the recent podcast he did with Chris Williamson, and I noticed him doing something that more and more people are doing these days, and I find it quite unhelpful. That thing is essentially a straw man fallacy. He paints a weak picture of his opponent's views and then has an easy time tearing it down without anyone around to defend it. So Chris brought up the topic of population collapse.
Oh, well, I've thought for at least 10 years that the biggest problem in 50 years will be that there's just not enough people.
I remember hearing you say a few years ago that you thought we'd peak at about 9 billion.
Yeah, we probably won't hit 9. Yeah.
I'm interested, but I can't see how not enough people is going to be a problem. Unless he means all the way down to the last man and the last woman only having one child and then we go extinct. That seems quite unlikely to me. But in any case, my quarrel is not with this claim, but with Jordan's depiction of people who worry about population increase. So Jordan holds a view that in 50 years, our biggest problem will be that there's not enough people.
The biggest problem in 50 years will be that there's just not enough people.
He briefly backs this claim up by saying,
the population collapse in developed countries is precipitous, right? It's like we fall off a cliff.
But he spends a lot more time attacking people who hold the opposite view, that unchecked population increase could bring bad consequences.
Yeah, well, and this idea that the planet has too many people on it, there's no sentiment more implicitly genocidal than that statement.
Here, Jordan is bringing the opposition's view to the table. What's expected from an honest interlocutor is to present the strongest possible version of that view, or what's known as a steelman. Sadly, in this instance, Jordan fails to do this.
So what do you mean too many people? Exactly. And what do you mean the planet? And what do you propose to do about that exactly? Mass abortion, is that your answer? Or should we do something a little more dramatic? Maybe we'll just shame people out of having children.
If you don't suitably understand a view, then you're not fit to debunk it. To show how unfair these almost rhetorical questions are, I'll provide some answers to them.
So what do you mean too many people?
More people than there are resources to sustain, whether these resources be food, space, or otherwise. Imagine an island that has enough farmland to feed 100,000 people. If the population stays below that, that's a good number of people. If it goes over that, some people are going to go hungry. That would be too many people. This generalizes to the entire planet eventually.
And what do you mean the planet?
Earth. You know, the celestial body that we all live on. That's what the planet is. But an environment or a climate could be a smaller area too, like the imaginary island I mentioned earlier. Limiting resources have been a driving factor of human and indeed animal migration throughout history and still today. A population that inhabits a certain area, once it exhausts all the food in that area, it'll either move on or die. Modern day trade and the post office might change this because people can live in areas with limited resources and just have the ones they're missing delivered to them. But this becomes a question of the planet when we don't have enough resources on Earth to feed all of the mouths, which means that some people will have to go hungry if we're talking about the resource of food. Of course, if the human population does collapse, then none of this will be a problem. But if it continues to rise, well, then it could be.
And what do you propose to do about that exactly?
Well, Jordan's already given an answer to this question.
I looked at population trends and first of all found, not that this is an act of genius or anything, that as soon as you educate women, the size of family shrinks precipitously, like below replacement. And that's partly because women have other options. That's a huge part.
We're seeing this play out.
Oh, yes. I mean, all the countries in the West are way below replacement. Korea's way below replacement. South Korea, Japan, way below replacement.
So it seems like a viable solution would be economic development and equality of opportunity so as to educate women. This seems like a good goal in its own right, but if it also serves to mitigate the problem of a population explosion, well, then that's what we might do. Remember, at this point, I'm only trying to build a stronger case for worrying about population increase. I'm not commenting on the likelihood of it actually happening, nor of the alternative of a population collapse. My issue is with the way Jordan presents the arguments of his oppositions when they're not around, and indeed the character of people who hold these arguments.
Mass abortion, is that your answer?
Obviously not. If we could minimize unplanned parenthood, why wouldn't we? And of course, that would slightly help the problem of overpopulation, but no one is suggesting mass abortion with the goal of minimizing population growth.
Or should we do something a little more dramatic? Maybe we'll just shame people out of having children.
No. Jordan goes on to give an anecdote of a professor who did just that, and I too find the actions of that professor contemptible. Okay, so now we have a much stronger argument to try and debunk. Now I'll comment on the likelihood of these outcomes. Jordan doesn't believe the human population will make it over 9 billion.
I remember hearing you say a few years ago that you thought we'd peak at about 9 billion.
Yeah, we probably won't hit 9. Yeah.
The United Nations predicts the human population will reach 10 billion in the year 2057. My personal guess, for what it's worth, is that in 50 years, our population will be around 9 billion. Based on the war in Europe and how poorly we've responded to COVID, I think it's entirely possible that we will wipe out a sizable chunk of ourselves from sheer stupidity. Whether you believe the lab leak hypothesis or the wet market theory, either way, we shouldn't have been doing that. We shouldn't be butchering animals in such unhygienic situations like factory farms or wet markets, and we shouldn't have been doing gain-of-function research, at least not until we have better abilities to contain pathogens in these facilities. Ultimately, though, it doesn't matter which is more likely between uncontrolled population increase and population collapse, because we should be making plans for dealing with either outcome. And we certainly shouldn't ridicule those who do worry. I mean, we could reassure them, but this is a kindness that Jordan does not offer here. If the straw man isn't obvious enough to you yet, Jordan takes it several steps further and prescribes a whole psychology to underpin these types of views.
But it's associated with like a deeply rooted existential self-hatred. I mean hatred at the level of humanity is like a virus on the planet, that we're a cancerous growth.
Alex Epstein calls this human racism.
Right.
And it's that.
Yeah, well, we're a cancer on the planet, unchecked growth, just like a cancer. It's like, that's us, a cancer. It's okay. We know where your heart is located. Because what's the implications for a doctrine like that? What do you do with a cancer?
Cut it out.
Yeah, that's for sure. Poison it or whatever. There's nothing you don't do to a cancer.
Jordan presented this metaphor and then credits it to somebody else.
So you're going to use a metaphor like that? There's too many people on the planet? You're going to use a metaphor like that?
This attack on people worrying about population growth is only sound if their purported worry is just a facade in the hopes that they'll trick people into reducing the population and that trend would continue all the way down until extinction. This seems like a tenuous proposition at best, and I'll explain why. But first, Jordan is also making the claim that having these worries means you're ashamed of humanity.
So, yeah, it's unbelievable, and a huge part of it's rooted in this existential shame and horror at the condition of being human and the fact that life is rife with suffering and a lot of it's unjustified. And
it seems so obvious to me that the opposite must be true. If people are taking the time to worry about things that might lead to the destruction of humanity, then those people must desire the continuation of humanity, not its end.
Existence is such a foul thing because of all its suffering, essentially, that it would be better if it was merely annihilated. And that's the Mephistophelian stance. This whole show should just come to a halt. Look at how corrupt people are. Evil reigns everywhere. It's nothing but will to power. We're destroying the planet with our unchecked ambition, all of it rooted in greed and Machiavellianism and jockeying for position. And we're so contemptible that we should just roll up and die. And we should shame women into not having children. And we should shame men so they never manifest any planet-destroying ambition. And it's unbelievably appalling. It goes all the way down to the bottom.
The goal, for those worried about the consequences of overpopulation, is to keep humanity going effectively forever. This maximizes the amount of potential lives to be lived. It seems someone would have to care very deeply about humanity to strive for this goal. I think it's perfectly reasonable for a utilitarian, like myself, to worry about the consequences of overpopulation and that doesn't mean that I harbour any hatred for humanity or genocidal goals. A better tactic for this conversation might have been for Jordan to spend more time explaining why population collapse is likely to happen and why that would be a bad thing. So he briefly explained how it might happen. His argument is essentially, premise 1, as soon as you educate women, the size of families shrinks precipitously, below replacement.
As soon as you educate women, the size of families shrinks precipitously, like below replacement.
Premise 2, it's implicit, women are getting educated.
That's a huge
We're seeing
part
this
of it.
play out.
Oh, yes.
Conclusion, therefore, the population will shrink precipitously. Effective collapse.
I mean, all the countries in the West are way below replacement.
Okay, I accept this argument. One thing to add, however, is that populations can explode precipitously as well. Here's a graph of population over time. As you can see, our population has about doubled in the last 60 years alone. But as I said, I'm willing to accept his argument as to how it might happen. But why would having a smaller population be such a bad thing? Jordan doesn't answer this question. Perhaps he's suggesting we fail to breed to the point of extinction. But I think we would be able to see that problem coming and be able to put measures in place to prevent it. And we're nowhere near that problem at the moment. Jordan does explain that it's more specifically a lack of young people that would be the problem.
We're running out of people. And what that means, of course, is that you run out of young people. It'll be young people we don't have enough of. And of course, young people are the ones who do the innovation and are going to do most of the heavy lifting, etc. And so there's going to be a terrible shortage of young people.
But again, I fail to see why this would be a problem. As our technology develops, we're automating more and more, so potentially require less work anyway. And if the population decreased, we would need less and less work to sustain ourselves anyway. I'm not denying that a decreasing population size might have bad consequences, but what I am saying is that Jordan hasn't explained what these consequences might be and why. Instead, he spent all his time attacking the people worrying in the opposite direction. Like it's fine to worry that the population would decrease, but you're a monster if you worry about the population increasing. Why, Jordan? Please explain why. Okay, this is almost a postscript in the middle somehow. I realize I mentioned climate change earlier, and I know I'll get comments if I don't explain this. So I find Jordan's views on climate change very difficult to decode. Jordan went on the Joe Rogan Experience recently and touched on climate change, and he brings his usual talking points to the table. And it serves as another example of this dishonest tactic.
Well, climate is about everything. So, okay. But your models aren't based on everything.
And then he employs the same navel-gazing rhetorical questioning.
Well, how did you decide which set of variables to include in the equation if it's about everything?
This is also a semantic game because he's defined the terms and he's done it poorly.
If it's about everything, your models aren't right. Well, climate is about everything.
This is the valid argument form modus ponens, and it concludes, therefore, your models aren't right. But I reject the premise. Climate is not about everything. You can take a specific climate example. For instance, the polar ice caps. Premise 1. If the planet warms, then the ice caps will melt. Premise 2. If the ice caps melt, the sea levels will rise. Premise 3. If the sea levels rise, there will be floods. Therefore, if the planet warms, there will be floods. This is the valid argument form hypothetical syllogism. Anyway, I wanted to avoid climate change. My best guess is Jordan doesn't believe human-caused climate change is a problem, and if he does, that there's nothing we can do about it anyway. So I've been careful not to use climate change as a rebuttal to any of his points. I would really enjoy seeing Jordan go toe-to-toe with a climate scientist, but as far as I'm aware, he hasn't done this. So, in conclusion, I'm seeing this tactic used more and more recently. And, well, maybe it's been going on forever and I'm only just starting to notice it now. But it's sad to see otherwise respectable and intelligent people like Jordan Peterson fall back on such a dishonest strawman tactic. Again, may I say that I have great respect for Jordan Peterson, but that it's possible for me to disagree with his methods of communication and his views. And I don't mean to say that I could do it any better either. It's certainly very difficult to present your views extemporaneously, and Jordan does it exceptionally well. But it's completely expected that mistakes will be made in form or in reason from time to time. Anyway, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.